Order, order. Jeremy Lefroy to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Austin. I beg to move that this House has considered International Men's Day. And it's a privilege, Mr. Austin, to lead this debate. And I'd like to thank members of all parties who've shown their support for it by being here today, and also to my honourable friend for Shipley, who's led the debate in the last 2 years. International Men's Day, the 19th of November, is now marked by 70 countries around the world and has been part of the annual events calendar in the UK since 2010. The objectives, which apply equally to all men and boys, include the promotion of role models, a focus on male health and well-being, the improvement of gender relations and gender equality, and the creation of a safer world for us all. In the UK, International Men's Day takes a gender-inclusive approach and therefore believes in ensuring that issues affecting women and girls are also resolved. This year, the UK themes are making a difference for men and boys and how we can give men and boys better life chances. I would stress that it is an International Men's Day, and although I'm sure we will be speaking very much on matters in the UK, we should not forget the challenges affecting men and boys around the world, whether it's boys as soldiers, whether it's the targeting particularly of men, as we've seen in the conflicts in the Middle East. That's not at all to forget what has happened to women and girls as well, but we must remember what is going on around the world. But we will concentrate, well, I will concentrate in my remarks on what is the situation in the UK. There's so much to talk about, and all I can do is just really skirt across a number of issues, and I know that honourable members are going to go into more depth in other areas, and I welcome their remarks. I'll start, Mr. Austin, with role models, and I'd like to recognise today the huge number of men in the UK who daily work positively for their families and their communities, who actively promote equality, not just in words, but in their actions. It's often asked, where are the male role models who can inspire other men and boys? And the answer is they're in every community, but they often need to be encouraged to share their experiences, their difficulties, as well as their successes. By their very nature, good role models are often reticent to speak about themselves and often do not even recognise themselves as role models. They think they're just doing their best, often in difficult circumstances. I think of a close friend of mine who's a great role model through his role as a leader of an organisation which works with hundreds of young people in North Staffordshire. He would be the last person to recognise himself as a role model, but he is, including to me. So how can we support such people? I would suggest that promoting people publicly as role models is not necessarily the best, or certainly the only way. Everyone has their failings, and there's nothing which some of the media like better than to raise someone up, only to knock them down when they turn out to have feet of clay, as we all do. However, supporting the work of those who are genuine, but often unassuming role models, and who are having a positive influence on men and boys, and women and girls, can be really effective. And it's not difficult to identify them. Ask most local councillors, community workers, police officers, PCSOs, and they will let you know who are great role models on the ground. Then see how they can be supported in their work and perhaps supported to expand it. I've seen great and lasting work done in my constituency and elsewhere in the scouting and guide movements, boxing clubs, Duke of Edinburgh's award groups, as well as open youth groups run by committed professionals and volunteers. Government's answer to a problem is often new initiatives involving new organisations which are given substantial sums of money, and when the money runs out, the organisation folds. Much better, in my opinion, where possible, to help existing people or organisations which have a proven track record over many years, but often they are the last to be considered for support. I'll turn now, Mr. Austin, to health and well-being. Men are more likely than women to die prematurely, and 1 in 5 men dies before the age of 65. Mortality among those from cardiovascular diseases, from those under 75, is twice as high among men as women, and for diseases considered preventable, 3 times as high. And cancer under those under 75, mortality rates are almost twice as high for men as women, and in cases of preventable cancer, 17%. So there's so much more work to do in improving men's health, of course.
member for giving way and congratulate him on securing the debate. Would you agree with me that one of the issues in terms of greater male awareness, particularly about health issues, is that we men seem to be very keen. If the television breaks down, we get the TV repair person in. If the lawnmower isn't working, we take it to the gardening shop. And if the car breaks down, we take it to the garage. But we seem to be very reluctant whenever it is either a mental health issue or a physical health issue to go to our GP. And we need to ensure that men particularly, everybody of course, men particularly who've been very reluctant on personal health issues, they take the issue to their GP or the relevant health professional.
I totally agree with my honourable friend. He's anticipated what I was about to say. Because there's evidence, there's clear evidence, as my honourable friend has just said, that men are less likely than women to seek help when sick, and that's certainly true of me. I've sometimes been reluctant to go to the doctor in case it turned out that I had something serious, as if the very act of seeking help would make it more serious than it was. I don't think it's just me. I didn't want to confront the possibility of having a serious illness. Now, there's been good public health work done to ease people's fears of seeking medical help if they think something is wrong. I think the NHS recognises that. But there is, in my opinion, a greater need for health education starting at school, which promotes both healthy lifestyles and encourages people to consult their doctor early if they believe something is not quite right. I have personal recent experience of a close friend, not yet 50, whose cancer was caught too late because he'd understandably, due to the nature of his job, attributed these symptoms to work-related stress when it was much more serious. Men should not worry that they'll be wasting valuable NHS resources by going to their GP because they have unusual discomfort in their stomach, a persistent cough, or problems passing water. Any NHS professional would prefer to be able to allay their patients' fears by showing that the problem is not serious, or, if it is serious, by catching it early and hence greatly improve the prospects of cure. I'll turn now to mental health because we have a serious problem with men and boys. 76% of all suicides in the UK last year were male. 4,287 lives lost, more than 2.5 times the number of deaths on the UK's roads. Suicide rates have fallen in the last 35 years, and I welcome this, but the fall is greater for women, 50% fall, which is wonderful, than men at 14%. And suicide is the leading cause of death of men between the ages of 20 and 49. Research commissioned by the Samaritans has looked at the issues surrounding male suicide, and I'm going to go into them in some detail because I think they are so important. Among the Samaritans' findings are that men from the lowest social class living in the most deprived areas are up to 10 times more likely to end their lives by suicide than those in the highest social class from the most affluent areas. This is undoubtedly a matter of inequality. Men in midlife are the age group most at risk, which surprised me. Men compare themselves against a masculine gold standard. Having a job, providing for the family is central to this, especially for working class men. Men, and here I speak from personal experience, are far less positive about getting formal emotional support for their problems compared with women. And when they do, it's at the point of crisis. And there's also the well-known link between unemployment and suicide. Unemployed people are 2 to 3 times more likely to die by suicide than those in work, which is why it is an absolute moral mission to combat unemployment.
Congratulate the honourable member in obtaining this. I'm sure he'll agree with me that more needs to be done with mental health, not just with older men, but young men in my own constituency. The level of suicide is up dramatically. The youngest was 12 years of age, one at 15. More needs to be done to help those young people, especially from deprived areas that have difficulties in socially.
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and the recommendations which the Samaritans have given, and there's 6 of them, and I'll give all of them because they're so important, are to recognise and take on the gender and socio-economic inequalities in suicide risk, follow the evidence and not the preconceptions. Secondly, ensure that suicide prevention policy and practice takes account of men's beliefs, concerns and context, what it is to be a man. Recognise that loneliness is for men in midlife a very significant cause of their high risk of suicide, and enable them to strengthen their social relationships, which, quite frankly, women are usually better at doing than men are. Ensure there are explicit links between alcohol reduction and suicide prevention strategies. Often the two are taken apart. They should be much closer linked. Support GPs to recognise the signs of distress in men and make sure those from deprived backgrounds can access a range of support, not just medication. It seems that often for men from poorer backgrounds are given much more medication rather than counselling and other support. And finally, and very important, provide leadership and accountability at local level. And I congratulate councils who are taking this very seriously up and down the country. So I'd like to hear from my right honourable friend, the Minister, how he believes that we can all work together to tackle suicide of all people, and particularly the tragically high rate of male suicide. I haven't here gone into great detail in some of the excellent initiatives, whether sports initiatives, whether peer communicators, because I know that perhaps others or the Minister himself will refer to them, but it would be good to hear more about that. I'd like to turn now to the access rights of fathers and children. One of the saddest things I've had to confront on an almost weekly basis in my surgeries, as I'm sure all colleagues here have had to, is the fallout from partnerships and marriages which have gone wrong. The problem is almost inevitably one of two. Either a father is neglecting his responsibilities to contribute to the maintenance of his children, or father and children are denied access to each other. The causes are complex, especially in the latter cases, and I am no expert. However, I have no doubt that in some I have seen there has been a deliberate attempt to use all means possible to prevent the father from seeing a child or children, just as I have seen cases where fathers have used all means possible to avoid their responsibilities for child maintenance.
Will he give way?
Of course.
I'm very grateful, and I think my honourable friend is touching on a very important issue. Is he aware, like me, of the growing examples of parental alienation, where actually one parent is deliberately turning the children against the other parent in order to stop access to that child, even when people are contributing to their children's upbringing?
Sadly, yes, and I've seen that on several occasions. One I remember in particular in a surgery a few years ago, which was just devastating, where a father had lost access to all four of his children. It was very, very sad indeed. But as I say, we need to be balanced in this debate, because there are many cases where, as I say, fathers have totally neglected their responsibilities as well. But both have got to be addressed. Now, we must be more determined to stop people ignoring or playing around with agreements or court rulings. These actions deny parents and children either the financial support they need or the access to each other, which is so critical to the development both of parents and children. I know this is a difficult area. When families have to resort to law, there is already great sadness. But when they do so, the law needs to uphold the rights and demand the responsibilities of all involved. And I understand that there is a green paper coming forward on family justice in the coming months, and I do hope that it will tackle these areas. I'll turn now briefly, Mr. Austin, to education, and I'm sure that others will speak on this. There is so much more for boys and men to achieve in education. In 2017, the average attainment 8 score for boys in state-funded schools was 43.4, compared with 48.7 for girls, the equivalent of about half a grade lower per subject. 39% of boys achieved the highest 9 to 5 in the new system grades in both English and maths, compared with 45% of girls. And when it comes to higher education, the Higher Education Policy Institute published a report which identified higher dropout rates and lower degree performances for males. But there are other indicators where males were doing better. So it's not a clear-cut picture in higher education. There are no straightforward answers to this discrepancy, as I know the Minister has more experience than probably any of us in this room will appreciate. And the best answer is to seek to improve attainment for all children, boys and girls, and for all students, male or female. But we cannot ignore the discrepancy, and I'd like to hear from the Minister his analysis and proposals to address it. But I'd also like to point out that I believe technical education and investment in that area is incredibly important. And it is lacking at the moment. We need to do more in that area. There is no doubt that technical education is more attractive in many areas to boys than some of the education that they are given and expected to complete. And I think that's an area that I know the government is looking at, but we need to take much, much more seriously. We also need to encourage more men into the teaching profession, just as we need to encourage more women into engineering. In England, 26.2% of teachers are male, 15.2% in primary and 37.6% in secondary. I spoke earlier about role models. Teaching is just about the best profession in which to be a role model. And could I ask the Minister what is being done to ensure that the fine profession of teaching is introduced as a great career option to all students? There are so many other areas we could touch on. Rough sleepers, for instance, where 88% of them in 2016 are men. Domestic abuse, which is horrible for, obviously, particularly for women, but can affect men as well, and that's sometimes forgotten. In conclusion, Mr. Austin, we've just concluded the poignant remembrance season, and that brings me to a cause for great thankfulness. On Sunday in Stafford, I saw the hundreds of names of men and boys on the war memorial as I stood waiting to lay a wreath. That is not happening to our men and boys at the moment. Later, I joined the Penkridge Anglo-German Remembrance Association for their service at the main German military cemetery in my constituency in a beautiful wooded vale on Cannock Chase. More than 5,000 German men, and basically boys as well, lie in peace there. And finally, I went to Colwich Parish Church, where the names of all the men, and again boys, as some of them were boys, from that village, and Greg and Little Hayward, who died in the wars of the 20th century, were read out by the Lichgate, sometimes two from the same family. I and my generation and my children's generation have not had to experience the horrors of a world war, and that is a huge advantage. We pay tribute to the great professionals, men and women in our armed services, who keep us safe at great personal risk. Most of us, unlike our fathers and grandfathers, have not had to spend years of our lives fighting. But that gives us an opportunity and responsibility to contribute positively to our families and communities, to work for peace, to look out for the interests and welfare of others, and help to build a better world. I've pointed out many areas in which we can all work together to improve the life chances, health and well-being of men and boys. But we can also be thankful just how much life has improved for most of us over the past 100 years, and ensure those improvements are within reach of all.
The question is that this House has considered International Men's Day. I'll call Joe Swinson.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Austin, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship in this important debate, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Stafford for introducing it and all of those members who supported this debate being heard. It's the first time that I've been an MP that we've had this debate on International Men's Day, as I was not in Parliament for the previous two occasions, so I'm delighted to be able to take part. I hope this will become a firm annual fixture in the Commons debating topics. And I hope, if I may say, that in future years it may be a debate that takes place in the main chamber. I think that these issues are important and deserve to be properly explored. Gender inequality is endemic right across society. The stereotypes, the assumptions, the rigid constraints on behaviour for both men and women, for girls and for boys. And of course, often our focus is on how women and girls lose out from this gender inequality, and it's right that we explore those issues. But as we are already hearing today, and will do more so in this debate, it is absolutely the case that men and boys are also negatively affected by gender inequality. And that's why gender equality is something which is good for everyone. I think sometimes in the media, these issues are pitted against, like men against women, as if there's some battle of the sexes going on, when in fact the reality is that working to create a world that is more gender equal is one that will be good for everybody, and that one we should be able to join forces to help to create. I particularly wanted to talk about healthcare, and particularly mental health, in terms of men and boys, because I think this is one area that is hugely an issue, and it's something which starts from very early on. We heard some of the statistics in the opening speech about how men are more likely to commit suicide, and indeed that is the biggest cause of death for men under the age of 45. And it really prompts us as a society to take a step back and to look about what services we're actually providing for men when they are finding themselves in trouble. And also that stigma element, which I think we are starting to break down. In recent years, there's been a welcome move towards talking more openly about mental health. And I know in the Chamber, honourable members from different parties have spoken very movingly about their own battles with mental health problems. And I think that's very much to be welcomed. But equally, I don't think anybody would suggest that we are there yet when it comes to breaking down that stigma. And also, importantly, making sure the services are there. For too long, mental health has been the Cinderella of the health service. It should be treated on parity with physical health problems. And as yet, those resources are not yet there in our communities when it comes to mental health provision for individuals who need that support. And of course, if it's more difficult for men to seek help in the first place, and then when they do, if those support services aren't there, then that's a double whammy. I'm aware in my own constituency of a really interesting project that has been set up specifically to help men with mental health difficulties called Brothers in Arms. And speaking to the founders of that, it is really interesting how their concern is that there is not enough specialist service that really particularly cater for men, recognising some of the difficulties men might have in coming forward. And so I think that organisations like that, and I know there's many other organisations like that, particularly south of the border, and many really strong campaigners and advocates who are raising these issues and putting them on the agenda. We really need to make sure that is something which is supported, and indeed that progress is accelerated. Of course, I'll give way.
The point that she's making about men's mental health projects is a very good one, and would she agree that even for men in ethnic minority communities that the disparity is even greater? And would she welcome projects like the REACH project in my constituency, which tries to address those issues with the ethnic minority population?
Absolutely, the Honourable Lady makes a very good point, and trying to make sure that we reach out to groups who are less likely to come forward, and all of the different reasons why that might be, the intersectionality, if you like, of the different challenges that people are facing. It is important that services recognise that, and I'm sure we all have stories in our own constituencies of these types of services run by excellent individuals, some of whom might be paid, but many of whom are volunteering, and that is very much to be supported, but resource is also vital. I think in trying to consider, why it is difficult for men to come forward, we need to go quite early in life to start looking at the stereotypes that are placed on boys from the earliest months and years of their lives. We talk about things like boys will be boys don't cry. People are told to man up as if, showing some kind of emotion is a sign of weakness in some way. And actually, the Honourable Member for Stafford talked about some kind of masculine gold standard and that pressure to be the breadwinner. And of course, for anybody who loses their job, that is a real problem that they're obviously, from a practical perspective, thinking about how they will pay the bills. But if you have layered on top of that some kind of view that because of your gender, it is specifically your job to be able to get the money to pay the bills, that adds a layer of additional pressure. When actually, it's 2017, and we should be able to be sharing that responsibility, and different couples will have different ways of working out, if they're a heterosexual couple, of who might be working, whether both individuals in the couple are working, but we're not in the 1950s. We don't need to cling to these old stereotypes about saying it's always the job of the man in a couple to be going out there and being the breadwinner. And I think this leads to far too many men suffering in silence, and it is really damaging for boys and young men. There was a fascinating television programme on the BBC over the summer, which some honourable members might have seen, called No More Boys and Girls. And it went into a school and spoke to 7-year-olds and really explored gender issues and how even at that early age they were already being embedded. And one of the things that really struck with me, in addition to the stuff about the girls lacking confidence and underestimating their abilities, they did a a sort of test to understand where the boys and girls were at on different issues. And they asked them to describe emotions and how many words they could use to describe different emotions. And the boys had far fewer words to describe emotions than the girls. It was a really marked difference between the boys and girls, with one exception. The emotion of anger was one that the boys had plenty of words to describe. And I think when you look at what that is saying about 7-year-olds, it really is something which is starting early. And so for all of the mental health services that we must absolutely put in place, we need to look at how we are parenting and the messages that young children are receiving, which I would argue are even more gendered than they were before. Compared to when I was growing up in the 1980s, it is much more segmented, pink for the girls and dark sludge colours for the boys. As the mother of a young boy, you go to buy clothes, you go to buy toys, and it is very clear what is supposed to be for girls and what is supposed to be for boys. As if somehow, liking rainbows and butterflies is mutually exclusive from liking buses and dinosaurs. My nieces, love dinosaurs, and my little boy loves butterflies. Why should we be saying to children that this is something which is only for one gender or another? And it starts with that stuff that some people will say doesn't matter, but it means that girls and boys are being told very early on what their role is. When they read books and they see that more of the characters who go to work and have a job are the boys or the men characters, then that's why, or one of the reasons why, young boys and young men grow up thinking that it's their job to be the breadwinner, and that pressure is piled on. And that takes me to the issue of what happens at school. There is a gender gap in education that we should be as worried about as the gender gap in the workplace, and they are different gender gaps. And in education, the fact that boys are reading less than girls, and not just in terms of fewer books, but reading less thoroughly, is something we should be just as worried about as the fact that girls tend to drop out of science or physical education in their teenage years. And in terms of these roles of, breadwinner and so on, the flip side of that is how we value men's role as fathers in our society. And I think that this is an incredibly important role that has often been dismissed and undermined. You just look at some of the stereotypes in popular culture, the Homer Simpson type of, dads just being a bit hapless and not being able to be up to the job. When actually men are just as capable as women at being parents. There is a myth that somehow women are naturally better at parenting. But, breastfeeding aside, there is nothing that women can do as parents that men cannot do. It is not about women being just naturally better at it. It is about basically who spends more time doing it. Practice makes, maybe not quite perfect when it comes to parenting, because I don't think perfect parenting exists. But it is certainly about experimenting and about practice and about learning. And we should recognise that and recognise the role that men play. And why is it so important that men are involved as fathers? Well, we know it's good for children. Children do better in social and language skills. Their mental health is better if their fathers are actively involved. And amazingly, this intensive involvement of fathers is a better predictor of whether a child has higher academic achievement than their income is. It is that important to a child's development. But it's also good for men, Mr. Austin. Men are happier, healthier, more productive at work, and they live longer if they are involved fathers and close to their children. Finally, I just want to say there are cultural barriers to this that we must break down. I was delighted when I was a minister to introduce shared parental leave. It's my proudest achievement from my time in government, which helps parents to choose how to spend time looking after their children. That was a great first step, but it needs to be built upon. There's a review due next year, and I think we need to look at how shared parental leave can be extended to all parents, such as the self-employed, how we can have more dedicated time for fathers, and indeed look again at the pay for that to make it easier for dads to take that up. I've been delighted to contribute to this debate this morning, Mr. Austin, and I'm really interested to see what other members have to say.
Before I call the next speaker, can I just say that I'm going to be calling the front benchers to respond at about 10:30, so it would be helpful if backbenchers could keep their remarks to about 6 minutes. Call Steve Double.
Thank you very much, Mr. Austin. It's a pleasure to speak in this debate under your chairmanship, and I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Stafford, for securing this very important debate. And I'm delighted that International Men's Day is getting more recognition. because I believe it is important that we take a moment, perhaps more often hopefully than once a year, but at least once a year, to particularly focus on and think about the challenges facing men today. The theme of this year's Men's Day is celebrating men and boys, and I particularly want to take the time that I've got to focus on one aspect of that, and that is the role of fathers. I believe absolutely essential for our country today and for our future that we do all we can to help dads be better dads, to support them in their role. Because I believe if we do that, it not only helps those men who are dads, it not only helps their children, but actually the whole of society will benefit. One of the reasons that I'm particularly interested in this subject is that I have the honour of being, back in the early 90s, the first dad, the first father working for Barclays Bank to take paternity leave and to request and achieve a change in my working pattern to help balance my life and my work responsibilities with that of being a new dad. And today that isn't remarkable, that many big companies like Barclays are doing, are providing this, but certainly 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, it was quite unusual. And we've certainly seen progress in this area today, but I do believe that there is more that needs to be done to enable dads to balance the many pressures and challenges that we face today with our work-life balance. Change in this area, as the Honourable Member for, I've forgotten your constituent, East Dumbartonshire, highlighted that we have seen changes in this area, but there is still, I believe, further that needs to go in changing workplace culture to support and respect the role that fathers play. We know that Britain has an appalling record on family breakdown generally, and the impact that this has on childhood life chances. Children where dads play an active role in their families, in their lives, have better attitudes at school, they enjoy school more, they have higher educational expectations, and they make better progress at school. And noticing that the schools minister is on the front bench, I'm sure this is something that he would particularly like to comment on, that I believe the more we can do to help dads play a positive and active role in the lives of children, the better educational outcomes that those children will have. I will gladly give way.
Could you also maybe stress those of us who come from single-parent families by men do get on with life quite well sometimes?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for that intervention, and happily to acknowledge that. Absolutely. I mean, I think that we have to acknowledge that families today do come in all shapes and sizes, and single parents work incredibly hard, and in many cases are heroes in terms of the amount of time and effort and blood, sweat and tears that they put into raising their children. But that should not mean that we don't actually say that more often than not, the best outcome for children generally is when they have a father and a mother playing an active role in their life and in their upbringing. What is a little-known statistic, I believe, is the extent that fatherlessness is in the UK. According to the ONS, there are 2.7 million dependent children who have no father figure at home, which is roughly 1 in 5 children. When fathers are absent from children's lives, greater level of deprivation and poor economic and social outcomes are measurably worse, impacting not only children, but our society widely as well. One shocking statistic is that 76% of all male prisoners come from households without a father figure in the home. Boys with little or no involvement with their fathers are twice as likely to become offenders compared with boys with a highly involved father. These statistics should concern us and prompt us to take action. We are at last increasingly understanding the impact of fathers in families. We haven't really got a family breakdown crisis in this country. What we do have, I believe, is a crisis of fatherhood. I'm hugely passionate about the work of the APPG for fatherhood, of which I'm one of the vice chairmen, and ensuring that we talk about families, and I think we should do much more of that in our political conversations, but that we don't forget in that the absolute vital role that fathers play. Often dads today are misunderstood and are placed into an out-of-date stereotype. The biggest stereotype of them all is that dads simply don't care or don't want to be active dads. Recent research by the University of Plymouth suggests that fathers face a negative bias and suspicion from managers when seeking a better work-life balance or applying for part-time working. This has been branded the fatherhood forfeit. Last year I did some work with the Centre for Social Justice on a small piece of research where we interviewed 50 working fathers on the challenges they faced in balancing work and family life. What struck me was the strong emotional response from every single dad, every single one of those fathers in the interviews. We found that amongst all 50, dads were trying hard to be dads and in many cases making significant amendments to their working lives to accommodate time with their children. I believe the stereotype of dads that don't care is very much out of date. I will gladly give way.
I'm glad he's raised this point, the concern about the issue of stereotypes, which have always been around. In my constituency, Scotland's National Male Cancer Charity, Cahonas Scotland, in a piece of research called Men, Masculinities and Male Cancer Awareness several years ago, highlighted if we actually ask men about services and their experience, we actually break down the actual reality of a men's everyday life, especially around parenthood.
I remember, Phil, that intervention. He makes a very good point. And I believe that, as we've said, we want to be a society that is equal, that puts equality at the heart of our society, and that is equally in the workplace. But I believe if we're really going to achieve that, we need to look seriously at having a positive approach to fathers. So in just winding up, Mr. Austin, thank you for that prompt, I believe we need to get to the stage where being father-friendly in the workplace is something that employers actively seek to achieve. I believe we can achieve this, and if we do, it's not just dads who will benefit. We will benefit children, we will benefit mothers, we will benefit families, and ultimately we'll benefit the whole of our society. Thank you, Mr.
Could I ask Mr. Davies to pop up for a moment, and can I call Jim Shannon, please?
Okay, Mr. Alison. Just to say, first of all, congratulate the honourable gentleman for Stafford for bringing the issue to the Westminster Hall for our consideration. It's a privilege to speak in this debate this morning. My wife would say that every day is Men's Day, and yet I would argue it's a woman's world and they just let us live in it. So but jokes aside, Mr. Davies, I'm honoured to be a part of this Men's Day for the simple fact of what it is promoting. It's raising awareness of health and other issues. A friend of mine recently called into the constituency office, and I was surprised to see this usually clean-shaven gentleman looking slightly less clean-shaven. I wasn't going to probe into why that was the case until one of the girls had asked him, "Gary, did you lose your razor?" We all laughed, and then he explained that for him he's partaking in November, something which he's involved in each year. Incidentally, I look around the room here, there's 3 people with beards, whether they're November people or not, I'm not sure. And those who, if they are, well done. If you're not, perhaps maybe you would consider shaving it off and using the money for the charities that are involved in that. I've had a moustache since I was 18-year-old, Mr. Davies. I wasn't all that good at 18. My mother told me to get the cat to lick it. But I had no cat, so I couldn't do that. But it eventually grew anyway, no matter what the case may be. So it's good to be at least participating in this in some way. Moustache is a way of provoking people to remark and for me to begin that discussion. Awareness is something that is so important, and men, especially men of the older age bracket, are so reticent to talk about problems and symptoms. We need to break the cycle and to train our young men to know that there is nothing wrong with talking about health or issues which may be slightly awkward. The International Men's Day website has a very eye-catching first paragraph. We know that men's health is worse than women's in almost every part of the world. The recent World Health Organization data shows that globally male life expectancy at birth in 2015 was 69 years of age. For females, it was 74 years of age. Women on a worldwide basis live 5 years longer than men. We know that 95% of workplace fatalities are men, and that 99% of combat deaths are men. These are the stats as the World Health Organization has put forward. It's past time that we stopped being so reticent about discussing things and began to realise that, to quote the old phone advert, it's good to talk. And it is. the sad fact that 6 people commit suicide every week in Northern Ireland. And I want to specifically mention that because I think it's important that we focus upon the suicides and the reasons for that. Despite more than £7 million being spent on suicide prevention in the province every year, the deaths of 318 people in 2015 were registered as suicides. That was the highest annual figure since records began in 1970, and also a 19% increase on the number recorded the previous years. So it's something that we are really concerned about back home in Northern Ireland. And in my constituency, and indeed in my constituency of Stafford and Ballynahinch in particular, the local churches came together to set up a suicide awareness and to bring people together, young people in particular, because we had a very, very high level of suicides in the town of Ballynahinch. Now, some of that good work has reduced that number and has made people perhaps maybe more conscious of when they're depressed, when they're under pressure, that there's somebody there for them. So it does work, and the churches in Ballynahinch deserve credit for that. Of the suicide deaths registered in 2015, 77% were male, 23% were female. 132 of the deaths involved people aged between 15 and 34, again, young people, while 5 were aged 75 or older. So don't think that those who get to the age of 70 haven't got loneliness or depression as well. And I understand there's a debate here tomorrow on loneliness at 4:30 in this hall. And there might be a chance for that to be reiterated again. The issue was most stark in the capital, with 93 people taking their own lives in the Belfast Health Trust area, almost a third of the 2015 total. The stats are shocking, and the reason why awareness-raising events like International Men's Day are so important, it's essential that we use days like this to point people to the fact that there are places to go for help, and there are people available to talk about anything from health to feelings. And it's important for us as men who perhaps don't always express ourselves in the way that maybe we could. It's important that people don't characterise this day as this is a day that men are encouraged to go to their man cave to have a drink of beer and play a video game. Quite the opposite. It's a day when we want to encourage men to get together and to talk. To talk about football, if that's what the conversation is, or just to talk about your feelings. And we've been advert in Northern Ireland, and Melville, colleague and friend from East Belfast will be aware of this here. And it shows a very bubbly person who's the life and soul of the party. And you see when he goes home and he closes that door, different person. So don't always think that the person who's the life and soul of the occasion is a person who doesn't have the problems. We need to ensure that all young men also feel a part of this. And that is why I'm so pleased that this is about celebrating the diversity of men and boys, and letting young men see how much older men have come through and are still standing through. Wisdom is gained through years of experience and learning from others. You're never too old to learn. It's passed down from generation to generation. And this event should be a way of connecting people and moving past the generational or cultural boundaries and moving into where men are men and can share and help each other along. No man is an island is a message that we often use, a saying that we often use, but it's true, and more people need to take on board. And the sight of my unshaven friend on that morning has reinforced the fact that all of us can and should play a part in starting these conversations and taking them to a place which puts awkwardness aside and ends in sharing life experiences and problems for the better of our entire community. I welcome International Men's Day on Sunday as a conversational starter and as also a friendship starter across the world. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Austin. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I congratulate my honourable friend Stafford for securing this debate and other honourable members for participating in it. Like the member for East Dumbartonshire, I also hope that next year we can see the debate restored to its rightful place in the main chamber, where there's also more time to cover some of these important issues. It's fair to say, Mr. Austin, that I'm often pilloried for arguing that men and women should be treated equally. I don't really see there's anything particularly controversial in saying that, but it never ceases to amaze me how often I get accused of being a misogynist or sexist or some other form of abuse merely for saying that men and women should be treated equally before the law. That was a principle with which I was brought up with as a child and still maintain today. And what it seems to have happened is that in many cases militant feminists have tried to close down any talk about men and women being treated equally. And so in order to try and close down the debate, they hurl abuse at the people who raise these issues in the hope that people will not listen anymore to what they say, that they will stop saying those things and also deter other people from standing up and saying those things. Those people who do that to me, Mr. Austin, clearly don't know me, because I'm certainly not going to be bullied and intimidated in that way, and I'm delighted that other people are finding the courage to raise issues that affect men too. I don't think anything I've ever said should be seen as controversial in a normal world, but somehow saying that men and women should be treated equally seems to be controversial. But we can have some successes. A few years ago, I said that men were being treated more harshly in the criminal justice system than women. It was worth reiterating at that time the exact opposite was being said both in this chamber, in Westminster Hall debate that I held once, that was being asserted that it was actually the other way around, and even ministers were claiming it was the other way around. But I'm delighted to say that this is one battle that has been won, and people do accept that men are treated more harshly in the criminal justice system than women. Even the research carried out in the course of the Lammy Review concluded males were independently associated with approximately 83% higher odds of being sentenced to imprisonment compared to females. So we can have victories for common sense. We just need some more. Men are increasingly getting a bad press, and I think that this needs to be challenged. And it seems bizarre to me that those who apparently fight discrimination, injustices and stereotypes are quite happy often to perpetuate all of those things against men. So when thinking about International Men's Day, let's remind ourselves that there are men who are victims of unequal pay. There are men who are victims of discrimination and harassment. You wouldn't think it when you see all the headlines about equal pay gaps only mentioning women, but they don't mention part-time male workers who are paid less than their female counterparts. For various reasons, the overall pay gap is not a result, in my view, of widespread discrimination. But if they say that it is, then surely they should be equally outraged about the pay gap which has men as the losers, part-time pay. Surely the logic is that they must be the victims of discrimination too. Although that's unlikely to happen because it seems, in the eyes of some, only men can be sexist. There are also certainly men who are victims of domestic violence, and men are more likely, far more likely, to be victims of violence generally. Men are victims of sexual assaults and rapes. Men are victims of stalking and controlling behaviour. Men are victims of so-called honour-based violence too. Yet you wouldn't necessarily think it if you were to pick up a paper or see the news or hear about strategies for just tackling violence against women and girls. Every single victim of a crime is important, and preventing these crimes against anyone, male or female, should be a priority. The focus on solely women and girls is serious. And just to give one example of how dangerous it can be, a serious case review led to Bradford Council and the police apologising for letting down a 14-year-old boy who was groomed by dozens of men. Phil Mitchell of the Blast Project in Bradford said, "I think the fact he was a boy was an issue. If the police had got a call that a girl was planning to sleep with an older man, then I think officers would have responded with more urgency." It's been said by people, not least the leader of the Women's Equality Party, that I'm a proponent of the idea that you achieve equality by treating everyone the same. Well, Mr. Austin, if that's supposed to be a criticism, I'm stumped, and I'll certainly plead guilty to it. Why? I'm not going to give way because other people want to speak, and I know time's at a premium, and I'm coming to a close, Mr. Austin. Why should male and female murderers not be treated the same? What possible justification could there be for treating them differently just because of their sex? I think those who think the sexes should be treated differently in the eyes of the law are the ones who are truly sexist. They are the ones with the problem. Men and women are different, but that's perfectly compatible with them rightly being treated the same in the eyes of the law. Some people have said that every day is Men's Day, but I think that if anyone looks at the facts, that is certainly not the case. I would rather, as I've said before, there was no need for an International Women's Day or an International Men's Day, and that men and women just happily coexisted without tension or people stirring up issues with their own agendas. So I hope International Men's Day this year provides the opportunity to focus on the negative stereotypical portrayal of men and the unjustifiable attacks on those who do not support the politically correct, militant feminist approach to things. I hope that men and women can agree that this is not right and join forces to ensure the minority trying to do this damage do not succeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Austin. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I must say, I kind of approached today's debate with kind of mixed feelings, and particularly walking through Westminster Hall. On the way to this debate this morning, there was a young group of school kids, and I observed a young girl looking at all of the statues all the way along St Stephen's Hall this morning. So I think that probably does reaffirm the point that sometimes in this House every day is Men's Day. Nonetheless, I do welcome the opportunity to take part in the debate, and I want to use my speech, however brief, to talk about men's health, both physical and mental, the important work done by men's sheds, and finally, locker room banter. And before going any further, I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Stafford, for initiating today's debate. Last week, alongside Councillor Michelle Ferns, I had the pleasure of visiting Shettleston Men's Shed in my constituency. It's run by William Smiley, who clearly has a passion for the project and has invested a considerable amount of personal effort and time into getting it off the ground in conjunction with the Shettleston Housing Association. The Men's Shed supports approximately 60 guys who come together twice a week to play darts, pool and do woodwork, among other activities. And during my visit on Friday, I met Billy Thompson, who was attending the Men's Shed for the first time. And Billy, quite movingly, told me about his struggles with poor mental health and the support afforded to him by Parkview Health Centre, which signposted him to Shettleston Men's Shed. And I was quite struck, actually, by Billy's candour when he said that just 3 weeks ago he was in a very dark place indeed, whereby he considered if he even wanted to be alive anymore. And fast forward 3 weeks and Billy is now sitting in a men's shed talking quite openly about his mental health. And I think that's very powerful. However, there is a legitimate point to be made about the funding for such groups because it's often sorely lacking. And I don't want to be a politician that simply pays lip service without banging the drum for more funding, particularly about supporting running costs for what is an excellent project, undoubtedly saving money for the National Health Service, so I think that should be put on the record. Mr Austin, I want to briefly address the issue of what has been dubbed locker room banter, which has been a topic of conversation in recent days that has finally been a light that's been shone in this building concerning the abhorrent nature with which some men talk, view and act towards women. We know all too well the comments made by President Trump when in 2005, talking of a woman, he said, "Just grab them by the pussy." Later, when trying to defend frankly the indefensible, he suggested that it had just been locker room banter, a kind of soft phrase which seeks to play down the seriousness of a conversation which would rightly turn the stomach of most men. And I think as legislators and leaders in our communities, we all have a responsibility to challenge the culture of locker room banter which still exists, not least within this building, as events in recent days and weeks have shown. In my remaining time, Mr Austin, I want to talk about mental health and suicide, and I'm particularly grateful to Craig Smith from the Scottish Association for Mental Health for providing me with an excellent briefing with some statistics which make, I'm afraid, some pretty distressing reading. And much has been said in this debate about suicide, and I want to offer just a few thoughts from a Scottish context, because 728 suicides were registered in Scotland in 2016 compared to 672 in 2015. That's the first increase in deaths by suicide for 6 years, which is absolutely shocking and I think should cause real alarm for those of us who are Scottish politicians and indeed the Scottish Government. And we know that when it comes to general health and well-being, that in 1 year, more than twice as many females consulted GPs for depression and anxiety than males did. So that's why I was pleased to learn that Sam H, in partnership with the Scottish Professional Football League and Hibernian Football Club, recently launched a new programme, The Changing Rooms, to promote men's mental health and well-being. The aim is to increase the social connectedness of men in their middle years and deliver a programme of activity that will reduce loneliness and ultimately improve their mental health and well-being. I think that's a good thing and that it should be commended in this House of Commons. But I want to conclude, Mr Austin, my remarks with a personal story, so I hope you'll indulge me for just a moment. A couple of weeks after being elected to this House in June, I got a phone call from my mother to tell me that my older brother had been admitted to the psychiatric unit at Wishaw General Hospital. My brother is 5 years older than me and considerably better looking. But he and I have always had quite a kind of jovial relationship, and perhaps due to the age gap, I must confess that we've never really had that kind of relationship that provokes deep emotional conversations. And so as I left Westminster in flew back home to Scotland, and I was driving over to Wishaw General Hospital. I found myself really pondering, as I got onto that word, how do I approach Ross? How do I talk about this? And on one hand, I thought to myself, should I just retreat to the comfort zone of being a jovial, humorous approach of manning up and telling him to just get on with it? Or should I step out of my comfort zone and actually have a conversation with him about our feelings and our thoughts? And I'm glad to say that I did actually do the kind of brave thing, and we did have that conversation, and it was a conversation that was very, very brief. But I think that's probably the most significant conversation that we in our lives as brothers have ever had. And in retrospect, I think that conversation showed that for men, it's important that we sometimes step out of our comfort zone if we're to truly step up. But for fear of getting emotional, I just want to conclude by saying, after my visit to Shelton Men's Shed and what happened in the summer, I was drawn to a bit of scripture in the Old Testament, which says, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. And I think that those of us in this house would do well to read and reflect on that.
Fiona Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Austin. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Stafford for securing this debate and on his excellent speech. Like the Honourable Member for St.Austell and Newquay and his similarly excellent speech, I want to talk about the importance of promoting active fatherhood to help improve children's life chances, particularly amongst the least advantaged. Supporting young men to be active, engaged fathers is, I believe, a matter of social justice. Government should be engaged in this. Evidence clearly shows that it helps reduce inequality. Children from low-income households with an active father are 25% more likely to escape the poverty that they grow up in. And time prohibits me from explaining further to colleagues, as I would have liked to have done, the further evidence about this, but it can be seen in the research from the Father Institute, Father's Impact on Their Children's Learning and Achievement, which is on their website, fatherinstitute.org, and also in the work of Dr. Gary Clapton, who interestingly says that active fatherhood is linked with girls' better educational engagement as well as boys. So all the indicators are that better life chances are there for children who grow up with active fathers in their lives. So what can government do to address this? Well, at its most extreme, as we've heard, 76% of all male prisoners come from households without a father figure in their home. And boys with little or no involvement with their fathers are twice as likely to become offenders themselves. So there are many practical ways, and I'm delighted that the Justice Department is committed to addressing this issue. Following the release of the recent Farmer report, the Justice Minister, Sam Gyimah, Right Honourable Sam Gyimah MP, has committed his department to helping men in prison maintain an active relationship with their children. Governors are now encouraged, where they can, to house prisoners closer to their families, to have family rooms available where children can be helped with homework. Prisoners record bedtime stories in some prisoners, which their children can listen to at home. And in general, arrangements are being made to facilitate a strengthening of father and children relationships, so that when the prisoners exit prison, there is a family life that they can hopefully return to, and which is even strengthened. Well, that's just one way. The Centre for Social Justice have many other suggestions. Again, time prohibits me from going through them all, but to promote more active fatherhood, the CSJ is suggesting that best practice from across the country on how this is being done in local authorities should be coordinated. There should perhaps be a champion to do this. They suggested that we have a national campaign to mirror the Scottish Year of the Dad, which ended last year, and which I understand the previous minister agreed to look into during a Westminster Hall debate last year, and which has helped link attitudinal changes around fatherhood with practical interventions at a local level. The CSJ say we need to change outreach amongst public services such as children's centres, maternity wards, health visitors, and through early years providers to ensure that they really do promote engagement with fathers and measure this. And as has previously been mentioned, we could look again at shared parental leave to see how fathers could be encouraged to take this up more. New fathers say that they do want better social and emotional support, but only 25% feel that there is enough. Could I also encourage the Minister, as well as looking at the CSJ's recommendations, to read the Manifesto to Strengthen Families, which I know he has a copy of, which is now being supported by around 60 backbench Conservative MPs and sets out a number of policy suggestions to government to directly improve the situation of fathers. For example, maternity services should maximise the chances of including fathers to be at an early stage. Fathers should be invited to antenatal appointments and fatherhood preparation classes to help them support their partners. There is one South London hospital where a small fatherhood charity holds weekly preparation classes for fathers-to-be. And it's very important because we know that those early years of aged 1 to 3 in a child's life are a period of great strain on family relationships and a period, unfortunately, of similarly great breakup. Hospitals should collect information about fathers' experience, about the importance of NHS friends and family tests, focusing their services on supporting the whole family. And similarly, we should ensure that the government finally bring into force Schedule 6 of the 2010 Welfare Reform Act, which requires all fathers' names to be included on birth certificates with appropriate exemptions. As well as improving the payment of child maintenance, this would enable local authorities to identify almost all fathers in their local area and ensure support could be offered to them at an early stage. Sceptics might say, well, we already register most fathers, but it's often those who are most in need of help who disappear. And in closing, as the CSJ says, parenting classes shouldn't just be a middle-class preserve, which sadly they are at present. In closing, the CSJ also says, if I may quote this, the consequences of a father falling out of a child's life are hugely significant, and any government that is serious about tackling social mobility and improving the life chances of our children needs to take fatherhood seriously.
Before I call Mr Clark, can I say that I'm going to call the opposition spokespeople at about 10:35, and if Mr Day and Ms Sheriff speak for about 7 minutes, then we should be able to get to the Minister at about 10:02, if that works. So Mr Clark, we'll be moving on about 10:35.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Chairman, and I will do my best to keep it very brief, and it's a pleasure to serve under your guidance. And thank you to the Honourable Member for Stafford for tabling this debate. International Men's Days raise some very important issues, as we've heard from other members. I try not to go over them again. I'm a father of 2 little boys, so I declare an interest, and I attended both their births and the prenatal classes, so I've done my best to start off well. Equality should mean tackling discrimination issues for both genders, yet there is still too little recognition of the important contribution that men and boys make to our society, and that they often face more social pressures than women do. And as the member for East Dumbartonshire said, that maybe isn't necessarily fair. Now, this can lead to extreme levels of stress and anxiety, and in the worst cases, a feeling of failure. And as the Honourable Member for Stafford explained, 4 in 5 suicides are by men, and I am staggered. It is the biggest killer of men under the age of 35. And it doesn't just happen in deprived areas. In the downturn in oil and gas in my own constituency in Aberdeenshire has created huge pressures on families, and the main breadwinner, and again, as the member from East Dumbartonshire said, that may be a stereotype, but I'm afraid that is the consequence. Raising awareness about men's well-being also means talking about their own physical health, and it means recognising that men are more likely to die of cancer or heart disease. And again, as the member for Staffordshire has said, the figures are available to us all on that. And as we've heard, 95% of workplace fatalities are by men. And in my own Gordon constituency, where we have had traditionally male-dominated employment, the main ones being oil and gas, agriculture and fishing, they've gone an awful long way of trying to reduce that, and particularly the fishing industry, which had a bad track record, is trying to improve that. And oil and gas now has a tremendously good track record. More women, of course, are going into oil and gas, and there may be some correlation that safety is improving. In Scotland, men's life expectancy is 5 years less than women, and I notice in all the statistics that's true all over the world. Having said that, the aim of International Men's Day is not to promote one gender over the other. It's not about who faces more discrimination, but rather calling for a more balanced approach to the gender equality. Now, members have spoken about personal cases in their own constituencies, and I recently was contacted by the sister of an acting police officer, a man. She wrote to me saying, telling me about his plight. His marriage had broke up, he was struggling to pay maintenance and keep a roof over his head. But the most tragic issue for him was not seeing his children. And I realised reading the email, which I'm sure happens to other members, I actually knew him and I had absolutely no idea how he was struggling so much with life, as the Honourable Member was speaking about his own personal circumstances. Now, we must promote positive male role models and hard-working men to the benefit of all, which is important to men and females if we promote that role model. And I was delighted to see at the Remembrance Day in Inverurie how many youth organisations have men still running them and women still running them, and to see that youth organisations often are now pretty well gender neutral. I am definitely going to come to Mr. Chairman. So quickly, just to shoot ahead, International Men's Day improves gender relations, but also creates a safer and better society where each individual, regardless of their gender, is able to reach their full potential. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Today.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship here today. May I start by thanking the Honourable Member for Stafford for securing this debate on International Men's Day, which will of course take place on Sunday the 19th. I am grateful for the Honourable Member for his detailed presentation and for reminding us that it is also an international event, and it is a pleasure to recognise that it is now promoted in over 80 countries. There are many issues which disproportionately impact upon men. However, in addressing these, it is important that we do not detract from the work done to address institutional bias against women. The main themes from today have been about male vulnerability and well-being, and there are clearly many facets to this situation, and poverty and deprivation are two of the key components, as is fatherless families. The issue of fatherhood has been very well covered by the Honourable Member for St.Austell and Newquay, and also by the Member for Conlington, and I'm very grateful to her for mentioning the Scots Year of the Dad, and I'd just like to take this opportunity to praise my own father publicly, Ron, who has been an absolute great role model in my life, and it's a reminder to everybody that children are children of all ages. And as I arrived here today for this debate, I got a message from him updating me about the cat which he's looking after and the car which he's getting sorted at the garage. Now, you probably thought it was a message from the whips. The whip was sitting behind me. I didn't get any message from the whip, so I think I've got a free rein to say what I like. And perhaps the crux of the problem for myself is that men are much more likely to be ruthless than women are. And the Scottish Government found that in 2014, 81% of those sleeping rough were male. And this is partly due to the fact that men are much less likely to seek help for issues such as mental health or substance abuse. Back in the 90s, I remember a housing slogan. I can't remember which charity had it, but we had it on car stickers around the time. And it said, "Build a home, build a life." Very true then, very true now. And Scotland has some of the strongest homeless rights legislation in the world. All homeless people have the right to temporary accommodation immediately, and if unintentionally homeless, to settled accommodation. With a commitment to invest over £3 billion over the lifetime of the Scottish Parliament and to deliver at least 50,000 affordable homes, and the most important component of that for me is that 35,000 of those are to be for social rent. And that builds on the work of the previous Parliament, where they exceeded the target of delivering 30,000 affordable homes. And then we come to perhaps the most frightening part of this debate today is the issue of suicide and early death. With around 12 male suicides a day in the UK representing 76% of all suicides. The Honourable Member for Strongford highlighted this issue very clearly, as did my colleague and friend from Glasgow East, who amplified the situation in Scotland, which has seen an increase for the first time in the last 6 years. Truly frightening and shocking. Of course, the Honourable Member for Gordon advised us that life expectancy for men is 5 years weaker in Scotland than that for women. I always tell people my own constituency is a great place to live, and it is. In my area, it's only 3 years lower, but it's still a problem that we need to address and tackle. But it's very much compounded further by issues of inequality. It is not an even 3 years across all social classes. The majority of children in care are boys. In 2015, 53% of the looked after children in Scotland were male. The educational attainment and outcomes for these youngsters is basically, how do you sum it up, is just not good. Only 6% go on to university and nearly half suffer mental health issues. And staggeringly, this statistic is appalling, a young person who has been in care is 20 times more likely to die before the age of 25 than someone who hasn't been in care. My honourable friend for Glasgow East spoke of the mental health and the impact of projects such as Men's Sheds and also of his own personal experiences, and it highlights many of that situation. Half of the adult prison population are people who lived in care growing up. A few months ago, last summer, in fact, several months ago now, it's a year and a bit, I visited Shotts Prison. A very interesting experience, as I say, an interesting place to visit, but not somewhere I would like to live. It's not often that I find myself in agreement with the Honourable Member for Shipley, but today I even found agreement with the Honourable Member for Shipley. 95% of the prison population are male, and it's shocking to learn that they do face more likely to be sent to prison and longer sentences than women for the same crimes. The increased attention being paid to mental health issues in NHS Scotland and now in England hopefully will help to reduce this. Harry's masculinity report produced by the UCL found that the main factor in mental positivity for men was job satisfaction, and having a direct impact on success of a business was also important, with autonomy being cited as a main reason for increasing job satisfaction. And self-esteem is absolutely of critical importance. The Honourable Member for East Dumbartonshire spoke of the issue of stigma, and that's something I would also like to focus a comment on. I asked the First Step, a local charity from my constituency, their experience. I've mentioned them before. They deal with issues particularly affecting men in developing addictions to alcohol or drugs. This charity deals with addicts in recovery, and 2/3 of their clients are male. They find that drug addiction is associated with unemployment, while alcoholism is more often associated with stress at work and are associated, both in cases, with self-esteem issues. The major issues for males in addiction are shame and guilt, with men frequently in denial of their problems and feeling useless or suffering from issues of depression. Fortunately, in my area, First Step is there to offer activities supported and managed by those in recovery and providing additional opportunities to develop skill and enhance self-esteem, and they really have made a difference to many of my constituents. In conclusion, equality is thankfully a core value in our society, and including equality to those of any gender, and I welcome this debate as an opportunity for highlighting these issues today. Thank you.
Well, Sheriff.
Thank you, Mr Austin. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning. I'd like to start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Stafford in securing this debate today and for his very, very thoughtful and constructive speech. And he has also given me some food for thought in terms of initiatives that I may want to explore further in my own constituency. I'd also like to take this brief opportunity to thank the member for Glasgow East for talking about his own personal family situation. It takes a huge amount of bravery to do that, and it was incredibly powerful, so genuine thank you. I note this is the third consecutive year that a debate has been held for International Men's Day. And for the previous 2 years, as is the case this year, the issue of male suicide rates is an important point of discussion. And I think we can all agree it's particularly poignant at this time, given the tragic death of a Welsh Assembly colleague just a few days ago. It concerns me, though, that we don't appear to be much further forward in tackling the causes of male suicide, and that this can merely turn into an annual discussion instead of a platform for which we can actually seek to make change. Although we know that the suicide rates in Great Britain fell slightly in 2006, this slight decrease is not enough and more action still needs to be taken. Some 76% of the suicides in Great Britain last year were male, just 24% being female. It is reported that approximately 90% of people who commit suicide have a mental health condition, either diagnosed or undiagnosed, and that suicide is still the biggest single killer of men under 50 years old. And a number of honourable members made points around issues in social classes, and I think that is something to be explored further. All local authorities are expected to have in place a multi-agency suicide prevention plan by the end of this year. But I do worry that in these times of austerity and cuts to local authority funding, this will be no more than a tick box exercise with no new money available to actually implement any of the Public Health England's guidance on reducing risk in men. I think the honourable members from East Dumbartonshire, Glasgow Central and Glasgow East also pay tribute to many of the different charities who are striving to tackle suicide prevention. And some of these include Andy's Man Club, State of Mind Sports, Campaign Against Living Miserably, Mine, The Samaritans, Times to Change, and It Takes Balls to Talk, to name just a few. These charities and many more like them are doing phenomenal work across the country. And I personally remember, as the Vice Chair of the APPG for Rugby League, listening to State of Mind Rugby, ex-rugby players who've been involved in quite sort of serious accidents or serious injuries, talking about how they were going into schools to encourage young boys particularly to open up about their mental health and to try and remove the stigmas. Many of these charities are attempting to challenge traditional stereotypes to encourage men to be much more open about their feelings, but there is still societal pressure on men to be strong, independent, competitive, tough and masculine. Studies have found these traits have been linked with mental health issues in men. International Men's Day UK has said that the focus remains on how can we make a difference to men and boys. Well, we can challenge male stereotypes from a young age to ensure that boys are more comfortable in their own skin and aren't constantly trying to prove themselves, that there is less language along the lines of man up and boys don't cry, that boys are told that it's okay not to join in conversations with their peers that seek to undermine women and create division and mistrust amongst the sexes, that boys can talk to each other about their feelings, and it doesn't matter if you're gay, straight, bisexual or transgender, because there isn't a one-size-fits-all catch-all, and our differences are what makes us interesting, even in these days. We can encourage boys to talk about their health problems and not to suffer in silence. And I think we've heard again from the Honourable Member for Stafford that men are far less likely to seek medical treatment for health problems, both mental and physical. As Chair of the APPG for Women's Health, I would like to see an equivalent group set up to discuss men's health, to help remove taboos around diseases such as testicular and prostate cancer. The latter actually took my grandfather. I mentioned in last year's debate, and a point that is still very relevant now, it's recognised that reticence remains among some men to visit a doctor and catch problems early. I think we also have to consider diversity in terms of advertising campaigns. Somehow when we see campaigns that look at things like stroke and heart attack, it's always a middle-aged, white, straight man that's involved in those advertising campaigns. And I think we absolutely need to broaden our outlook. We can support work to reduce social isolation amongst men who are less likely to socialise than women, and loneliness amongst men is an increasing issue, often causing depression and feelings of worthlessness. In a bid to combat male social isolation, there are a growing number of men's sheds projects opening across the UK. These projects offer workshops known as sheds where men can go to work and share ideas and projects or simply just talk. Activities vary enormously but include woodworking, gardening, model making, artwork, metalwork and engineering projects. And I'm very proud to support one in my own constituency in Denby Dale Ward that just opened recently, and was delighted to see firsthand the difference that this is making to the lives of those who are using the facilities. Age UK's recent research found that almost a third of older men in England who have long-term health problems are lonely, and this number is set to rise by 65% by 2030. And to help combat this, Age UK continue to work on a number of projects in this area, including Kitchen Kings, which is a project that helps older men learn how to cook, and it serves the dual purpose of a skills-based class and a lunch club. And Eat Well, Live Well is a local project that aims to improve the health and diet of older people, as well as tackle social isolation. Education is often key to improved life chances, so it is concerning that boys are still consistently behind girls in educational attainment. According to a study by Save the Children, boys are nearly twice as likely as girls to have fallen behind by the time they start school, with deprivation being a huge factor. Girls have consistently outperformed boys at GCSE for many years, and UCAS also reports that men are falling behind women in our universities, with 36.8% of young women entering higher education compared to 27.2% of men. Now, there will be some people who will inevitably try to frame this debate around who has it worse, men or women, and this is without a doubt juvenile. In a grown-up world where most people genuinely want to see progress towards equalities, we must recognise that to set this up as a battle of the sexes can only detract from the opportunity that International Men's Day offers to address the issues that do solely impact men. Now, I'm a proud feminist, but this does not mean that I'm ignorant or unsympathetic to the issue of inequality between genders where women fare better than men. I believe strongly that where inequality exists, it is our duty as parliamentarians to seek to change that and to create a more just and equal society. In conclusion, the issues that I've raised today are only a few of the issues that should be debated as we approach International Men's Day this coming Sunday, and I look forward to hearing the Minister's response as to the steps he proposes to take to combat these inequalities.
I call the Minister to respond.
Thank you very much, Mr Austin, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Stafford, for leading this debate, and to congratulate him on a typically thoughtful opening speech. The government is committed to tackling gender inequality in all its forms, building a more equal society where men and women do not find their choices and behaviour limited by their gender. We believe it will benefit everyone, no matter what that gender is. Now, the issues raised in this debate go far beyond this particular debate. They go right across government, and even in 2017, the UK has not yet reached full gender equality. And we all need to work together, government, parliament, business and society, to address some of those specific and deep-rooted problems. An essential part of this is tackling harmful social norms based on gender, the unwritten rules which prescribe the way men and women are expected to behave. Both men and women can too often feel held back by what society expects of them, preventing people from taking opportunities and from fulfilling their potential. Men stand to benefit just as much as women from addressing harmful gender norms, whether that be fathers who want to spend more time with their children without feeling this will hold them back at work, men and boys suffering from mental health problems, afraid to seek help because of the stigma attached, or male victims of abuse, of domestic abuse or sexual assault, who are worried that they won't be taken seriously. All issues raised by the Honourable Member for East Dumbartonshire. Now, my Honourable friend, the Member for Stafford, started his speech by talking about the importance of male role models and asking how can we do more to support male role models, an issue that was also raised by my Honourable friend, the Member for Gordon. Men have historically not been short of role models. For decades, the majority of politicians, business leaders and prominent artists were all male. But we have been lacking, what we have been lacking is in role models who celebrate the diversity of ways to be a man. So I am pleased that increasingly young boys who may be LGBT, BAME or from working class backgrounds can see people who look like them in public life, and that more men are speaking out about issues which were traditionally taboo, such as mental health or sexual harassment. The Women's Business Council recently partnered with Management Today to create the first Men as Change Agents power list, recognising 30 vital male role models. My honourable friend went on to talk about tackling health inequalities, an issue also raised by the honourable member for Strangford and my honourable friend for Gordon, as well as other contributions to this debate. Male life expectancy continues to be lower than female life expectancy, but life expectancy is higher than it has ever been for both men and women, and it's generally increasing in most areas, and the gender gap is closing. But we are aware that men are less likely to seek help, especially on mental health. We are working to address that stigma. Now, the government funds the Time to Change anti-stigma campaign, which has improved the attitudes of over 4 million people to mental health. And I welcome their recent In Your Corner campaign, which is aimed at encouraging men to talk about mental health. Honourable members have rightly praised the numbers of men and boys who suffer from, raised the high numbers of men and boys who suffer from mental health problems. The government is committed to achieving parity of esteem for mental health, and I'm proud that we have invested more than ever in mental health, with spending estimated to have reached now about £11.6 billion. And we have introduced the first waiting time standard for mental health to ensure that more people receive timely treatment. The government has also announced additional investment of £400 million to improve mental health crisis resolution services in the community. But of course, government can't do this alone. To end the stigma around mental health, we all need to do our part to create an environment where men can talk about mental health struggles and feel confident that they have the support they need. And I welcome, therefore, the work organisations such as CALM, Time to Change and Men's Health are doing to open up conversations around mental health. Now, honourable members also raised the issue of suicide in our society. Suicide is the leading cause of death in men under 50. Death by suicide are highest in middle-aged men, aged 40 to 55, and in 2015 there were 1,207 deaths by suicide in men aged 40 to 55. Now, we updated the cross-government suicide prevention strategy earlier this year to strengthen delivery of its key areas for action, including better targeting of high-risk groups such as middle-aged men. And I'm encouraged that the suicide rate decreased in 2015 after years of steadily increasing. Provisional statistics show that the number of deaths by suicide in 2016 may have decreased significantly by around 5%, but every death by suicide is a tragedy which has a devastating effect on families and communities, and that's why we are spending £25 million on suicide prevention over the next 2 years, and we're committed the next 3 years, and we are committed to reducing suicides by 10% by 2020-21. And we're also ensuring that every local authority has a suicide prevention plan in place by the end of the year, and we're working with local authorities to support them in quality assuring their plans. Now, my honourable friend for Stafford referred to loneliness as a key contributor to suicide. We recognise that social isolation and loneliness can affect someone's well-being and can lead to issues of depression, and we support many excellent organisations which provide specific community interventions for men in settings that are comfortable and accessible to men. And these include organisations such as the Men's Shed movement, referred to by the Honourable Member for Glasgow East, in what was a very moving as well as informative speech. And also organisations like State of Mind, which reaches out to men through sport. Now, my honourable friend for Stafford pointed to the different attainment rates at GCSE between girls and boys, and the government is determined, as he knows, to deliver an education system that works for everyone and ensures that all pupils, regardless of background and ethnicity or gender, have the opportunity to achieve their full potential. And we are therefore unapologetic about setting high expectations for what pupils can achieve. Our curriculum and qualifications reforms will ensure that pupils receive a rigorous academic education that prepares them for further study and ultimately success in employment. But my honourable friend is also right to point to the importance of technical education, which is why we are introducing high-quality T-levels and why we are committed to a further £500 million of funding for post-16 technical education. Now, my honourable friend, the member for Stafford, and my honourable friend, the member for Shipley, raised the issue of fathers being denied access to their children. We recognise the devastating impact parental conflict can have on families, and recent evidence shows children exposed to frequent, intense and poorly resolved conflict can experience a decline in their mental health and suffer poorer long-term outcomes. The Department for Work and Pensions will be launching a new Reducing Parental Conflict programme to help local areas improve their support for families. And then, as my honourable friend, the member for St.Austell and Newquay, said, and he's right to point to the importance of the involvement of families in family life. Now, the honourable member for East Dumbartonshire raised the issue of media perceptions, citing Homer Simpson, and she is right, of course, and undoubtedly that media can shape our perceptions. So we've all seen adverts showing hapless men incapable of doing the dishes, who need a woman to step in and take over. And although light-hearted, these adverts can reinforce damaging stereotypes which can affect how we view men's and women's roles and abilities in the real world. And she's also right to take pride in her role in the government's decision to introduce shared parental leave. Mr. Austin International Men's Day offers a good opportunity to remind ourselves of how far we still have to go to achieve greater equality in the workplace and in the wider society. And as we've heard today, there are still a range of issues where we need to do more to improve outcomes for men and boys. Tackling harmful social norms will, of course, benefit both men and women and both boys and girls. And by working to improve gender equality, this government is seeking to build a more equal society for the benefit of all our citizens.
Jeremy Lefroy to wind up.
Thank you, Mr Austin. I'm very grateful to the Minister and indeed all colleagues who've spoken in this debate today. And I'm grateful to my honourable friend from Shipley for suggesting that we have it. I think it's vital that these debates are not just words, but we see action coming out of them. And I very much look forward to having a debate this time next year and seeing that real progress has been made. Perhaps we can all look at our own constituencies and see what we can do locally, as well as encouraging the national leaders to take many of these issues forward nationally. And I hope this time next year we can have a debate in which we can point to real progress in a number of areas.
The question is that this House has considered International Men's Day. As many of that opinion say aye? Aye. On the contrary, no? I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.